a junior letter carrier for the U.S. Postal Service is a tough job. Being supported by your supervisor helps make it better. The Postal Service has a plan to improve retention among pre-career employees. For an update on how that plan is working, the Deputy Assistant Inspector General of Finance, Pricing, and Human Capital at the USPS, Rick Poland, is here to share his insights. Mr. Poland, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, being a letter carrier is a tough job. I just can't get away from thinking neither rain nor snow nor gloom of night will keep the postmen from their appointed rounds. How does the Postal Service think about employee training and retention in such a tough position?
Yeah, and I would agree. It is a tough job, and it's a physically demanding job at that. And some employees, they don't quite realize that before they sign up for the position. And so in our recent pre-career retention audit report, we visited different locations around the country and interviewed pre-career employees just to get their perspective, their points of view on the position. And some of the concerns that we routinely heard from them revolved around unrealistic job expectations and being overworked. But I will say only a small percentage actually cited training as an issue. Postal Service, they do have a robust training program for their employees. But I would say their biggest approach that they take is on-the-job training for their pre-career employees. So, for example, the letter carriers, they learn the delivery routes by, whether it's driving or walking, by actually getting out there and delivering the mail. So learning on the job is very important for them.
So a pre-career employee is a unique term, I think, to the Postal Service. Can you explain that just a little bit before we dive into some of the other things you learned in your audit?
Sure. In a nutshell, you can think of a pre-career employee as a temporary employee or more like a part-time employee. And I mean part-time in the sense that they don't receive the same employee benefits as a regular career employee would. Also, they're not guaranteed a regular schedule. What that boils down to is that they may not know in advance how many hours or which days they're scheduled to work like a career employee would. I mean, they could work fewer hours than they would like to one week, and then the following week they could be working more hours than they ever dreamed of working. But in our audit report, we looked at the four main crafts, or call them positions, which are our city carrier assistants. And so these are letter carriers that deliver mail on your city and urban routes, the rural carrier associates, and these letter carriers deliver mail on the rural routes. And I will say by far, the letter carriers are the largest percentage of pre-career employees, only because they serve every community and visit almost every home in America. But we also looked at postal support employees, and these include the clerks. So these are people you may see behind the counter when you go into the post office. And then finally, we looked at mail handler assistants, and these guys help in loading, unloading, and moving the bulk mail at plants. But basically, the Postal Service uses pre-career employees to supplement there as a pipeline for their career workforce.
It sounds a little bit like an apprenticeship program. So people really get a chance to practice on the job and see if they like it.
Exactly. Their main hope is to get these employees trained up in their pre-career years, and then they convert over to a career employee.
But that's where the problem lies, right? That the conversion rate is not as high as the Postal Service would like it to be.
It is. And so they have issues retaining them to even get them to stay on board for that pre-career or that career conversion.
But the Postal Service has put a new program in place to try to address some of those issues. Tell us a little bit about the 511 initiative.
One of the things that we looked at in our audit was their 511 initiative. And basically the goal of this initiative was to improve the new employee experience during their first 90 days. So according to their data, that 90-day window seemed to be where they lost most of their pre-career employees. And so they thought that to get them past that 90-day window, that 90-day period, there was a better chance they would actually stay on board. So this initiative actually attempts to standardize the process across the country, and it laid out some best practices that supervisors and managers should follow with their pre-career workforce. And so some of these best practices include things like trying to get the employees' work hours to less than 40 hours per week, or giving them one day off per week, which to help acclimate them to their new job. It also includes things like giving them periodic coaching and feedback to say, hey, you could do better in this area, or I think you're doing great in this area, and whatnot. And just to be clear, Postal Service calls these best practices. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually being performed or applied, at different locations.
I'm speaking with Rick Poland. He's the Deputy Assistant Inspector General of Finance, Pricing, and Human Capital for the U.S. Postal Service. Those kind of practices that are outlined in this initiative are good practices regardless of where you work. How are they working for the Postal Service? What did you find in your audit?
We did find that there's always room for improvement. Most notably, in our report, for the locations that were knowledgeable about the initiative, the 511, and actually follow the best practices, those locations actually saw better retention rates compared to the national average. And our report also shows that locations that had limited knowledge of the initiative or they weren't following the best practices, their retention numbers were below the national average. So having buy-in at the local level is very important for the success of the initiative. Another interesting thing that we found was that city carrier assistants, they actually have additional retention and mentoring programs that they piloted like 2 or 3 years ago. And initial results showed that the programs actually helped to improve the retention rates at the pilot sites. But we saw that they had not expanded the programs to other locations or even created new programs for the other 3 pre-career crafts. Well, what we learned during the audit was that they do intend to codify some of these programs in their labor agreements, which is currently an ongoing negotiation process. So it takes time to get it implemented.
But the 511 initiative didn't go into practice nationwide. It was only at a few select locations. Is that correct?
So the 511 was nationwide, but the CCAs, the city carrier assistants, theirs was just at the pilot site.
Ah, I see. And so how is the process going for expanding the pilot program?
Well, that's just it. So it's in negotiations with their labor unions. And so they're trying to get it codified into their agreements before they actually push it out nationwide.
So the Postal Service then thinks that these are good practices and wants them extended nationwide. They agreed with your audit findings.
They do, exactly. And we saw the data from 2 or 3 years ago where they were tracking data, and it actually showed the retention was improved at these pilot sites. So we think it is a good program to implement.
So what about managerial training? Because that's a key part of this. Is that also included in the labor agreement, or is that something more broad that the Postal Service is looking into?
It's more broad, and they have their own training regime, their own training program. And a good point with that is that a lot of the pre-career employees, it's a succession in their career. So they start as pre-career, they convert over to a career, whether it be a letter carrier, mail handler, or whatever, and then those same employees can move up to managerial positions. And so the whole thought is that they can start out with this pre-career workforce and just keep them moving throughout the entire, career path up into leadership positions.
So how will you follow up on your observations and findings from this audit? The new Postmaster General nominee perhaps has some ideas about this approach?
Perhaps. Well, we are seeing they are taking action. And I think a piece of it is going to come down to the training education on their part, meaning they have supervisors and managers out there that may not be aware of the retention efforts or initiatives that are ongoing. So, they are ensuring that these leaders are receiving the training that we actually noted in our audit report. Another part of it is the oversight piece. And so their headquarters, human resources people, actually look at retention rates and look for locations that are having challenges and issues. And they will do a site visit to see, hey, are you guys following these best practices, or are there local challenges going on that they can actually try to help to address and resolve? But we do have a robust follow-up process at the OIG. We don't close recommendations until we get sufficient evidence from them to say, hey, we've taken action and fixed the issue. But also, retention is a big issue, a big concern for them. So, I do expect we'll be doing a lot more work on this in the future as well.
Well, thanks for sharing your findings and your recommendations with us today. Makes me think I want to thank my letter carrier the next time I see him.
And you should.
For appreciation of all that they do for us. Rick Poland, the Deputy Assistant Inspector General of Finance, Pricing, and Human Capital at the U.S. Postal Service. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
We'll post this interview along with a link to this IG report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.